Hi guys, my name is Trinity, and if you are here, you must be here to talk about books because that's why I'm here, to talk about books. And in today's video, we will be doing my October wrap-up. In October, I read 13 books, 4 of those books being horror, 6 of those books being fantasy, and 2 of them being sci-fi. And this month, I did not DNF any books. So that is awesome. And 13 is back on track for me. However, I did listen to quite a few audiobooks, and usually in these videos, I go from the books that I like the least to the books that I like the most. But this month, I'm going to have to do them in reading order because I did quite a few audio. That way I am not skipping any books. Okay, so the first book that I read in October would be My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. Now, I have been interested in Stephen Graham Jones for quite some time because I love horror. And I love horror of just about any flavor. I'm not picky when it comes to my horror. I even like slow-paced horror, which is pretty off-brand for me. But this book really intrigued me. One, the title, My Heart is a Chainsaw. That's such a cool title. But Stephen Graham Jones himself has put out quite a few horror books that have been very, very well received. And so I've been intrigued by his stuff for some time. Now, for this book, I did end up at a 3.5, which I have rounded up to a 4-star on Goodreads. I enjoyed this book. However, as you guys know, I have ADHD. This book fed my ADHD. If you guys ever want to know what it's like to be in the mind of someone who has ADHD, I would highly, highly recommend this book because the main character's thoughts are completely scattered or hyper-focused. And it never is one or the other. It's kind of a mix of both. And I was just like, I don't know if I can read this because there's so much that my brain is just going crazy about. It did take me a little while to read this. It took me a few days, even in audio form, because I could only take it in small doses. But I did really like the mystery of this novel a lot. I really liked the way that the plot played out over the course of the book. And I even liked the main character. I just had such a hard time being in that character's head because, oh man. And I really like reading stories about Indigenous people because I am myself Native American, and I don't have a tendency to pick up Native American books just because they're kind of off-brand for me. I haven't been able to find a whole lot of fantasy that is surrounding Native American people. And so finding a horror was pretty cool. The second book that I read for October would be Among Thieves by M.J. Kuhn. This was a anticipated read for me. This was a pre-order. I knew going into this book that I was going to love it because of the things that everybody else had said about it. We have a badass female main character. We have thieves. We have machinations. We have a heist. This was gritty. It was dark. It was fun. It's everything I want in a tale about thieves. And I loved it so much. Now, this ranks up there with Nevernight for me. I loved this story. Now, I did give this book 4 stars, and I think the reason I gave it 4 stars is because there are a couple elements in here that I wish were a little bit more fleshed out, and they weren't. So the pacing of the book is, it's not necessarily breakneck, but it's pretty fast paced. And it didn't give us time to sit with the characters in a way that lets you like really, really get to know them. But I still really, really enjoyed it. And so I highly, highly recommend this book. And I've been trying to get everybody that I know to read it. Next, I read The Stolen Kingdom by Julian Boheme. And I did enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars. It's probably at a 3.75 for me. It's young adult fantasy, and it's typical of young adult fantasy, and that nothing really stuck with me. So I read this at the beginning of October, and it is now mid-November. I'm having a hard time recalling things about this book. What I do remember is there is a hardcore focus on vineyards that I found very odd. I get that the main character is really wanting to own their own vineyard and everything like that, but there was a massive focus on the vineyards, and I remember that distracting me from enjoying the story as much as I could have. But like I said, it has been 6 weeks since I read this book, and I'm having a very, very hard time recalling anything about it. The main thing that the book focuses on is the main character, Malice. She has powers that hint to a thought-to-be-dead bloodline, and she gets wrapped up in some political machinations in where she is going to assassinate the royal family. And that is pretty much the reason I picked it up in the first place. But again, I'm having so many issues trying to recall the specifics of this particular book. And that to me kind of says that the 3.5 that I gave it is probably a fair and accurate rating. And I'm looking at my review on Goodreads, and I basically had the same things to say about it when I finished it, is that the characters are fairly cookie cutter. There's nothing that stands out. The focus was on the vineyards, leaving the religion and the magic system to the wayside. And basically this is a par for the course YA fantasy. Now, another that is coming in at a 3.5, which makes me a little sad because I absolutely loved the first book of this trilogy. That would be The Malice by Peter Newman. I do still have the 7 to read. I haven't read it yet, but The Vagrant took me by surprise, and it's kind of fairy tale type narration of the story. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the characters. I loved the plot of it. This one, however, fast forwards about 20 years from the ending of the first book. And the child that the vagrant had been carrying around in the first book is now the main character of this book. One of the greatest things about the vagrant is the people he collects along the way. And I thoroughly enjoyed the found family aspect of it. I really enjoyed so many things about the vagrant that the Malice just didn't have. And so we're following the Vesper. We are following the young girl, and she is carrying a goat. I don't know if you can see that. Yes, she is carrying a goat, who hears this prophecy about the 7, which are the gods of this world. And Gamma, the sword that the vagrant carried, it starts to talk. Well, the Vagrant has decided that he no longer cares about this dang prophecy. He's built a life for himself. He just wants to live in peace and hides the sword. And when the Vagrant sets the sword aside, Gamma starts talking to Vesper and telling Vesper what she needs to do to fulfill this prophecy, since her dad won't. And so she takes the sword, she runs off, and she tries to wrangle as much help as she can get to stop what's coming. That's about all I can say without getting into spoilers for either the Malice or the Vagrant. But I didn't like the way this story was told quite as much as I did Vagrant, because it loses some of that whimsical storytelling when the main character can talk. However, the two main characters that are on the cover here, I do thoroughly enjoy their relationship and the way it builds throughout the course of the novel. There's a little bit of found family in this book, but it's not quite on the scale of what the Vagrant is. And the looming horror that they are facing doesn't make quite as big of an appearance in this book as it has, or as it did in The Vagrant. I am still excited for the 7, so I'll probably end up getting to that at some point before the end of the year. But I had thought this series would be a favorite just because of the whimsical storytelling of the first book, which just captivated me. But losing it in the second book, I don't know that it's going to be a favorite, but I do still think it's going to be a fantasy series that I like. Okay, so the next two I have to talk about in tandem because they were both 5 stars, blew me out of the water, and that would be Chaos Vector and Catalyst Gate by Megan O'Keefe. So I read Velocity Weapon a few months ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Sanda is one of my absolute favorite characters of all time. And it's like she ranks right up there with Mia. You guys know how much I love Mia from Nevernight. She is sassy and she gets stuff done. Like, she don't mess around. And I absolutely adore her characterization through the entire series. And she does change. She does grow. But she comes more into her own as the series progresses, and I love it. The other main character in this story is her brother. Now, her brother is on the political machinations side of this story because Sanda is a soldier. Her brother is a high-ranking politico in this world, and he is trying to get the big things moving that Sanda herself can't. This story is so good. So good. So I have been really, really loving sci-fi this year. This is my favorite sci-fi series so far. I don't know how there's going to be a sci-fi series to top this in regards to my personal tastes, because I love a strong female character. I love a sassy main character. We have LGBTQ representation. We have a plot that is so twisty and turny that you just get wrapped up in it. And there's so many mysteries to uncover throughout the course of this series that you kind of just feel yourself being tugged along on this journey of what's going to happen next, because we're not even sure why the things are occurring that are occurring. And so we have to figure it out alongside Sanda and her brother. It's so good. I highly, highly recommend The Protectorate by Megan E. O'Keefe. I really think that this is a series that a lot of sci-fi fans will love. And yes, I'm a baby sci-fi reader, but this has so much to offer that I'm going to be recommending it to everyone. Next, I buddy read Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill with my friend Andrew. And if you guys have not been around for any amount of time, Andrew is my book nemesis. We agree on absolutely nothing. However, we have come to find out that we both love horror in just about every flavor. And so he knew that I had been planning to read Heart-Shaped Box and asked me if when he got there, would I buddy read it with him? He said that he was about to start reading it, and I was like, okay, I have the audio. I don't have the physical yet, but I have the audio. We can do this. And so we ended up buddy reading Heart-Shaped Box. There were a lot of things that we agreed on about this book. However, I didn't like it quite as much as he did. I'm not a huge fan of shock value. I do not like Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn because there's nothing but shock value in that story, and I feel like Joe Hill doesn't need that crutch. He doesn't need that crutch to rely on, and in Heart-Shaped Box, he used it. He used shock value a little too much for me. I did still end up giving this book 3 stars, and I didn't DNF it, but it was just a little bit disappointing after having read Horns and having read The Fireman. I expected a lot more from Joe Hill than what this book gave me. I do think it's great as far as writing style goes, because I still enjoy Joe Hill's writing style quite a bit. And I really am looking forward to more books from him. I do think me and Andrew might end up buddy reading Nosferatu. And I don't know what else to say. I was disappointed with the shock value of this book, even though I liked the rest of it. I finally picked up Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. I loved this book. I gave this book 4 stars. It was so fun. There were so many elements of this book that I kind of knew going in, but really, really enjoyed the execution of. Like the magic system, I really enjoyed the execution of it. The humor, I really enjoyed the humor in this book. And I am so excited to continue this series. This is my first Robert Jackson Bennett book. I do have a feeling that I will really love The Divine Cities, but I'm also really excited to get to Shorefall because I just loved everything about this book. The plot, the characters, the magic system. It's just so interesting. And oh my goodness. We do have an older gentleman in this book that kind of acts like a sassy teenager. And then we have a magical object that also sometimes acts like a sassy teenager. And I know a lot of people are put off by that element of this book, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. And like I said, I'm very, very excited to get to Shorefall. And who knows, it might be a book that I pick up before the end of the year as well. All right, these books you guys will have seen me pick up for a vlog that I had a hard time finishing, but I talk about them in depth, so I'm just going to do a brief overview in this video. A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This is everything I want out of a Gothic novel. I loved this. There were so many twists and turns that I thoroughly enjoyed in this book. I loved delving into the mystery on this book. we have witchcraft, we have dark academia, we have a main character who's a little cuckoo. And I loved it. Loved everything about this book. I do believe I gave it 5 stars. So good. So good. If you guys like dark academia, I would highly, highly recommend A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. It came in at a 4.5. Sorry. All right, guys. Next, we have the horror that I have been dying to read. Something that was actually creepy, actually scary. Still didn't scare me, but it was just the most gross, gruesome, nasty, amazing piece of art that I have ever read. And I think the body horror in this book is just disgusting, but I think this book did everything it set out to do, and I loved it so much. The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is just a glorious, gruesome masterpiece that I am still thinking about. Still thinking about this book. I cannot wait to get to more of Nick Cutter's works because, yes, this gave me everything that I was looking for in a horror novel. Okay, the next 2 that I am going to talk about, I read the majority of them in October, but it was in November that I finished both of these books. But I want to put them in my October reads because, like I said, I read the majority of them in October. And so I feel like they belong here. The first would be Nightfall by Daniel Barnett. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It took me forever to read it. And it took me forever to figure out why it took me forever to read it. But I was reading this alongside Empire of the Vampire. And let's just be real, guys. I wanted to read Empire of the Vampire, but I was reading this. And so I was like, do I just not like this book? And no, it's just because I wanted to read Empire of the Vampire. As soon as I finished Empire of the Vampire, I blew through this. Like, in a couple hours. It didn't take me very long at all. And I really like the setup of these books. I really like the horror that we're facing because it's kind of an unknown. And I really like the apocalyptic feel of the books themselves. Everybody's going crazy, and just a few people are able to keep their minds straight enough to push through. So, and the ending of this is so epic. I absolutely love it. And so I'm looking forward to picking up the rest of these novellas very, very soon. I've actually ordered the next 2 already. So I'm thoroughly pumped. And thank you, Andrew, for making me pick these up because I do love them. I really do. Next would be the book that I feel I have been waiting my whole life for. Now, I will be doing a full review of this book, but my goodness, guys, this is the horror that I've been waiting for. This is the fantasy novel I have been waiting for. These are the types of vampires I have waited my whole life to read. And that would be Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. If you haven't figured out by what I just said, I gave this book 5 stars. This was fantastic. And let me just say this, J. Kristoff knows how to tug at those heartstrings. He knows how to write emotion so well. And the relationships that are built in this, the amount of deception that is built in this story, I absolutely love the idea of the undead versus living vampires. And this plays with that trope quite well. And I adored it. We are dealing with a holy order that is set to fight these undead vampires. And it is just, it's so good. It's so good. And we do figure out that there is a prophecy and that this prophecy is in the process of being fulfilled. And there are just so many twists and turns. Like I said, so many things happen what just blow your mind and you don't see coming. And characters just may not be who you think they are. Some of them are very much who you think they are. Is anything, anything exactly what you think it is? Probably not. But I loved this book so much. Like I said, this is the vampire novel I have been waiting my whole life to read. So thank you, J. Kristoff, for writing an absolutely phenomenal book. All right, that is it for me today. Like, subscribe, do all the fun things, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.